All right, Wayside School is Falling Down, chapters 19, 19, and 19. Here we go. Chapter 19, A Bad Case of the Sillies. Allison started up the stairs 5 minutes before the bell rang for school to start. The stairs were completely empty. Allison liked it that way. When the bell rang, the stairs would be crammed with 1,000 screaming kids scurrying to their rooms, but now it was nice and peaceful. She walked up past the 18th story and toward the 20th. There was no 19th story in Wayside School. Mrs. Zarves taught the class on the 19th story. There was no Mrs. Zarves. Allison didn't understand it. If there was no 19th story, then wasn't her class really on the 29th? Suddenly, she heard footsteps charging up behind her. She turned around to see Ron and Dee Dee racing. She leaned against the wall to get out of their way, but Dee Dee stamped on her foot. Then Ron's elbow jammed her in the stomach. "Umph," she grunted as she fell and rolled down 3 steps. Dee Dee and Ron didn't even stop to say they were sorry. Allison slowly stood up. Fortunately, she wasn't hurt, but her windbreaker was torn. She thought Ron and Dee Dee were silly. They race up the stairs, and then when they get to Mrs. Jewls' room, they're too pooped to learn anything. Allison thought all the kids in Mrs. Jewls' class were silly, even Rondi, and Rondi was her best friend. Then there was Jason, who was always pestering her. That was because Jason hated her, or else he loved her. Allison wasn't sure which. When she got to class, Dee Dee and Ron were sitting with their heads flat on their desks and their tongues hanging out. "You could have said you were sorry," Allison said. As she walked past them, she sat up straight in her chair, folded her hands on her desk, and waited as everyone else wandered in. Jason entered the room carrying a glass bowl with a goldfish swimming inside it. "Look what I brought," he said. "What's the name of your goldfish?" asked Mrs. Jewls. "Shark," said Jason. Everyone laughed. Allison rolled her eyes. "It makes him feel important," Jason explained. "Where should I put him?" "How about on top of the coat closet?" suggested Mrs. Jewls. Jason had to stand on a chair on his tiptoes. He held the bowl at the very bottom as he tried to nudge it over the edge of the closet. Suddenly, the chair toppled over. "Ah, gulp!" yelled Jason as he fell on the floor. He was holding the bowl upside down above his wet face. Mrs. Jewls hurried to the back of the room. "Quick, somebody fill the bowl with water," she said. "Where's Shark?" Jason made a face. "I swallowed him." The class went crazy. What a show-off, thought Allison. Mrs. Jewls rang her cowbell and told everyone to settle down. "You have a bad case of the sillies this morning," she said. She took roll. "Who's absent?" she asked. "Allison," said Rondi. "Very funny, Rondi," said Allison. "Anybody besides Allison?" asked Mrs. Jewls. "I'm here," Mrs. Jewls said Allison. She sat behind Eric Fry, so she thought Mrs. Jewls couldn't see her. Eric Fry was the biggest kid in the class. "Just Allison," said Mrs. Jewls. She marked it on her green roll card. "Damien, will you please take the roll card to the office?" Allison stood up. "I'm not absent," she said. Damien took the roll card and walked out the door. Mrs. Jewls, did you just mark me absent?" asked Allison. Mrs. Jewls didn't answer her. Allison marched to her desk. "Mrs. Jewls, did you mark me absent?" she asked again. Mrs. Jewls looked up. "Terrence, what are you whispering about?" "Nothing," mumbled Terrence. "If you can say it to Jenny, you can say it to me," said Mrs. Jewls. "Get off my case, buzzard face," said Terrence. "Terrence," exclaimed Mrs. Jewls, "go write your name on the blackboard under the word discipline." "But that's what I said to Jenny," Terrence protested. "Mrs. Jewls, what about me?" Allison demanded. Mrs. Jewls ignored her. Allison screamed as loud as she could. Mrs. Jewls didn't hear her. Allison faced the class. "Can't anybody see me?" she asked. Nobody answered her. "Rondi," shouted Allison. "Dana? Jason?" "This isn't funny," said Allison. "I know you're all just pretending." She stood right in front of Jason, leaned over his desk, and stared him straight in the eye. "I know you can see me," she said. "You're trying not to laugh." He stared right through her. She stuck out her tongue at him. He leaned forward, causing Allison's tongue to lick his nose. "Yuck!" she exclaimed, then wiped her tongue on her sleeve. Mrs. Jewls began the morning lesson. "Have you gone crazy?" shouted Allison. She ran out of the room and down to the class on the 29th story. "Come quick," she said. "There's something wrong with Mrs. Jewls' class." No one heard her. She slammed the door, then continued down the stairs to the class on the 28th floor. No one saw her there either. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Is this whole school playing a joke on me?" she wondered. "It's not funny," she shouted as loud as she could. She continued down the stairs, screaming anything that came to her head, hoping that someone somewhere would notice her. "Fish for sale, fresh fish, fat fish, get your fresh fat fish." A tall, skinny lady with very short hair stepped out of one of the classrooms. "Shh," she whispered. "This is a school, not a fish market." "You can hear me?" asked Allison. She was so happy she wanted to hug her. "Yes, I can hear you," the woman said sternly. "My whole class can hear you. You're making it impossible for us to get any work done." "I'm sorry," said Allison, "but something's wrong in Mrs. Jewls' class. You'd better come in here," said the teacher. Allison followed the teacher into her classroom. "What's your name?" the teacher asked. "Allison." "Boys and girls, this is Allison," the teacher announced to her students. "She'll be joining our class." "What?" said Allison. "But my name is Mrs. Zarv," said the teacher. "Welcome to the 19th story." Chapter 19. A Wonderful Teacher. Allison was still on the 19th story. The desks were arranged in clusters of 4. Allison sat at a cluster with a girl named Virginia, a boy named Nick, and a boy named Ray. But Virginia looked old enough to be her mother, and Nick looked like he should be in high school. Ray was a couple years younger than Allison. "Miss Zarves is a wonderful teacher," said Virginia in a sing-song voice. "She's the nicest teacher I ever had." "She's the only teacher you ever had," said Nick. "So, she's still nice," said Virginia. "I've always gotten all A's." "Aren't you a little old to be going to school?" Allison asked her. "You're never too old to learn," said Virginia. "No one ever leaves Mrs. Zarv's class," said Nick. "How long have you been here, Virginia?" Virginia thought a moment. 32 wonderful years. "I've been here 9 years," said Nick. "But she always gives us good grades," said Virginia. "That's true," Nick agreed. "I've gotten all A's since I've been here too." "Me too," said Ray, "and sometimes they answer all the problems wrong on purpose." "Where were you before you came here?" Allison asked him. "I went to, Ray shook his head. "That's funny, I don't remember." "I don't remember where I came from either," said Virginia. "Well, I do," said Allison. "I was in," but suddenly she couldn't remember either. Then it came to her, Mrs. Jewls' class. And Rondi was in the class, and Jason, and Dana, and Todd. She named every member of the class, including all 3 Erics. She didn't want to forget where she came from. "If I forget where I came from, I might never get back," she thought. "Did you say there was a girl named B.B. Gunn?" asked Ray. "Yes," said Allison. "B.B.'s a very good artist." "My last name is Gunn, too," said Ray. "I wonder if we're related." "Ray, no talking, please," said Mrs. Zarves. "Now, everyone please take out a pencil and some paper. I want you to write all the numbers from 0 to 1,000,000 in alphabetical order." "From 0 to 1,000,000? asked Allison. She couldn't believe it. "Don't worry," said Virginia. "If you run out of paper, Miss Zarves has more in the closet." Allison stared at her in horror. "But it will take over 100 years, she said. "So?" asked Virginia. "What's your hurry?" Allison started to work. It was bad enough having to write down all the numbers from 0 to 1,000,000, but she couldn't imagine how she'd ever put them in alphabetical order. 1 came before 2, 3 came after 1, but before 2, 4 came before 1, 5 came before 4, 6 came after 1, but before 3. "Don't worry," said Virginia. "Even if you miss a few, Miss Zarves will give you an A when you finish." 7 came after 1 and before 6. 8 came first. Allison couldn't think of any number that would come before 8, so she wrote it down. She also knew 0 would come last, if she ever got that far. By then she'd be older than Virginia. "I'll talk to Lewis at recess," she thought. "He'll save me." "When's recess?" she asked. "There is no recess," said Ray. "We're not allowed out of the classroom." "What about if you have to go to the bathroom?" "What's the bathroom?" asked Virginia. "We don't eat either," said Nick. "We just work all the time." "But we never have homework," Virginia said cheerfully. "That's because we never go home," said Nick. "We get a 2-minute break every 11 hours. But don't worry," said Virginia. "Miss Zarves always gives us good grades." Miss Zarves walked around the room, checking everybody's work. "Excellent, Ray," she said. "Very good, Virginia. You're doing wonderfully, Allison. You get an A for the day." Big deal, thought Allison. She had to figure out some way out of there. It was clear that Virginia, Nick, and Ray were all too far gone to help her. "Are there any other new kids in the class?" she asked. "Ben's new," said Nick. He pointed Ben out to her. Ben appeared to be about Allison's age. She was glad about that. When the 2-minute break came, she went over and talked to him. "Are you Ben?" she asked. "No," he said. "Oh," said Allison, "I was looking for Ben." "That's me," said the boy. "But you just said—" "My name's Mark Miller," said the boy. "But for some reason, everybody calls me Benjamin Nushmut." "There's a Mark Miller in my class," exclaimed Allison. "I know, that's me," said Mark. "I'm Mark Miller." "No, I mean my other class," said Allison. "What other class?" Allison thought a moment. "I don't remember," she said. After putting numbers in alphabetical order for 11 hours, her brain had turned into spaghetti. "Time's up," said Miss Zarves. "Everyone back to work." Chapter 19. Forever is Never. Allison was still stuck on the 19th story. 14 2-minute breaks had passed. "It's dictionary time," said Miss Zarves. Everybody got out a dictionary. Allison found a dictionary in her desk, too. What are we supposed to do with it, she asked. Memorize it, said Nick. But that's impossible, said Allison. No, it's easy, Virginia assured her. You memorize one word at a time until you get a whole page. Then you go on to the next page. How many words have you memorized? Asked Allison. I'm almost finished with the bees, Virginia said proudly, and I've only been doing it for 32 years. Allison opened her dictionary. Mrs. Jewels's class, she suddenly remembered. She sighed with relief. For the last 6 days, she'd been trying to remember where she came from. In her mind, she went through everybody in her former class. She didn't want to forget again. As she thought about each person, tears filled her eyes. She missed them very much, even Jason. They were all so wonderful in their own special ways. When the 2-minute break came, she talked to Mark again. He was the only person in the class who still seemed to have a brain. How did we get here? She asked. Maybe we're dead, said Mark. Maybe we died and went to... This isn't heaven, said Allison. That wasn't what I was going to say, said Mark. Allison felt a chill run up her spine. She looked at Miss Zars. Miss Zars smiled back at her. But she seemed so nice, said Allison. Could someone as nice as her really be the devil? I don't know, said Mark. She always gives good grades. What would happen if we didn't do our work? Asked Allison. We have to do our work, said Mark. Why? Asked Allison. What's Miss Zars going to do to keep us? Keep us after school? I don't know, said Mark. Teachers can always find new ways to punish you. They're experts at it. Your 2 minutes are up, boys and girls, announced Miss Zars. Everyone back to work. Allison returned to her seat. She tried to figure it all out, but she had so much busy work to do, she didn't have time to think. That's her plan, Allison suddenly realized. She shivered as it all came together for her. Miss Zars assigns us lots of busy work so we don't have time to think. She makes us memorize stupid things so that we don't think about the important things, and then she gives us good grades to keep us happy. Miss Zars walked around the room. Very good, Virginia, she said. You are doing so well. Excellent, Ray. Good job, Nick. She stopped when she got to Allison. Allison, why aren't you working? Allison looked at her. She knew Mark was right. Teachers are experts at finding ways to punish you. And if Miss Zars was a devil, who knew what she might have up her sleeve? Still, Allison had to take a chance. If she wanted to get back to Mrs. Jewels's class, she had to act as if she were in Mrs. Jewels's class. She took off her shoes and socks, sat on the floor, and sucked her toes. Allison, what are you doing? Asked Miss Zars. Allison took her toe out of her mouth. Get off my case, buzzard-faced, she said. Miss Zars was furious. Return to your desk, young lady, she ordered. Allison returned to her desk, but instead of sitting at it, she climbed on top of it and sang a song. I got one sock looking for the other, one sock looking for its brother. When I find that sock, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put it on my foot and I'll stick it in my shoe. Mark Miller smiled at her and silently clapped his hands. Everyone else looked at her like she was crazy. Your socks are on the floor next to your shoes, Miss Zars said coldly. I'll give you 10 seconds to put them on your feet. 10, 9, 8, 7. Allison climbed down from her desk. She picked up her socks and put them on her ears. How's this? She asked. 6, 5, 4. Albert Einstein didn't wear socks, said Allison. Why should I? 3, 2. Allison closed her eyes. 1. She felt something slam down on her foot. Something else jammed into her stomach. Umph, she grunted as she fell and rolled down 3 steps. Are you all right? Asked Dee Dee. Huh? Said Allison. She was on the stairs somewhere between the 18th and 20th stories. Sorry, said Ron. I didn't see you. Dee Dee and I were racing up the stairs, and then you suddenly appeared. You knocked off your shoes and socks, exclaimed Dee Dee. Oh, I ripped your windbreaker too, said Ron. I'm sorry. That's okay, said Allison. She picked up her shoes and socks, raced you up the stairs. All 3 ran up to Mrs. Jewels's room. When they got there, they were so pooped they sat with their heads flat on their desks and their tongues hanging out. Hi, Allison, said Rondi. Allison raised her head. Hi, Rondi, she said happily. What did I miss while I was absent? When were you absent? Asked Rondi. Hey, how come you're not wearing your shoes and socks? Allison hung her socks from her ears. What do you think? She asked. It's the new look. Rondi laughed. Allison, said Mrs. Jewels, you seem to have a bad case of the sillies this morning. Allison giggled. Jason entered the room carrying a glass bowl with a goldfish swimming inside it. Look what I brought, he said. What's the name of your goldfish? Asked Mrs. Jewels. Shark, said Jason. Everyone laughed. It makes him feel important, Jason exclaimed. Where should I put him? How about on top of the coat closet, suggested Mrs. Jewels. Jason had to stand on a chair on his tiptoes. He held the bowl at the very bottom as he tried to nudge it over the edge of the closet. Allison turned around to watch. She didn't want to miss this.